Hello and welcome to the Workplace Options Podcast. My name is James Callender. I'm the Director of Business Solutions for Australia, New Zealand, and I am joined today by Angela Hucker, who is the CEO of Epic. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, who are a clan of the Eora Nation, whose country I am joining from today. Angela Hucker, as I mentioned, is the CEO of Epic and a construction industry expert with over 20 years' experience within the industry. Angela has a remarkable portfolio including power, oil and gas, renewables, infrastructure, commercial, civil, mega projects, and even a spotlight on US TV show Megastructures. I'm going to come back to that because that is my favorite TV show. Angela's first-hand experience as a FIFO worker in remote corners of Australia fueled her mission to eradicate the challenges women face in the industry and positively advocate for change. Angela is passionate in reshaping the industry and inspiring us all along the way. Welcome, Ange.
Thanks, James. Happy to be here.
Let's dive straight into megastructures. I want to hear about that first. So my great idea of Netflix and chill is megastructures. My wife doesn't agree, but I want to hear your experience with this US TV show. Tell me more.
Yeah, okay. So I was actually working on a gas project at Curtis Island just off the coast of Queensland. So it was the APLNG project. And, you know, unbeknownst, while we were there, he was, these drones flying overhead, filming everything that we were doing. And then we found out that because the project was actually being built by Bechtel, which is a US organisation, and they were building 3 gas projects all at the same time, all right next door to each other. But ours was the biggest of the 3 that I was working on. And, Megastructures came out and filmed the construction. And so at the time when I was working there, our first scope of work that we had was building the flares for the gas system. And this thing was like the size of 2 football fields, like it was huge. And then here's the drones actually flying over the flares as we're building them and putting them together and, you know, standing above the office and everything. And we were like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. You know, and then you find out after the fact what it was for, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm actually going to be on megastructures, or, you know, the project I'm working on is going to be on megastructures. So that was pretty exciting.
That is really cool. Well, my wife is going to have to endure that with me when I go home this afternoon because that's something I definitely want to see. My fun fact is that I've had lunch with an astronaut. So there you go. I like introducing key persons with their fun facts. So thank you for sharing that, Ange.
Oh, you're welcome.
On the construction note, can you tell me more about your experience in the construction industry?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So, as you touched on, like, it is a pretty diverse background and it's been, you know, over 20 years. I'll probably share where I started, which was quite young. My journey actually started, when I was quite young, working on my father's turf farm. So we had a turf farm and was actually supplying turf for a lot of commercial properties. And then I actually moved into helping him with his landscaping business. And the type of projects he was working on were actually large government projects. So he'd be doing the commercial landscaping for like new high schools and housing commission estates. At that point, I did not have any concept that I would end up in a career in construction, of course. So after that, I then moved into a role where I was actually managing a chain of locksmith stores across Brisbane, sort of construction related, but not 100%. But I was actually one of only 2 females in Queensland who was actually trained in complex locksmithing systems. So even then it was like actually being, you know, in male dominated workplaces, you know, which has pretty much been my whole career. My first major construction project was actually building the Peppers Resort in Hervey Bay. So that was like a really comprehensive project. There was 132 units. It had a hotel and restaurant. There were retail outlets. There was a day spa. It had a function and conference centre. And so I actually played a really pivotal role in the project because other than the developers, I was actually the only other person who worked on that project from pre-construction to the operational phase. So I actually saw it, go from being sold off the plan to the construction phase and then right through to operational. So that was pretty exciting to see all the work come together, essentially. After that, then I was really fortunate to work across various sectors within the construction industry. I've worked on mega projects that you've touched on. In the oil and gas, I've worked on undersea electricity interconnectors, civil engineering, renewables, power generation, water management, commercial construction, quite a few international projects in Dubai, the Middle East, Singapore, Pakistan. I actually even was lucky enough to work on Dubai International Airport and Ferrari Resort as well. So that was good. You touched on the mega projects, so the mega structures, so I don't need to go back to that one. But yeah, probably half my time in the construction industry, I was a FIFO worker, so fly in, fly out worker, working around Australia in remote locations. So, I've worked Darwin, far north Queensland, central Queensland, Victoria, all over the place. And pretty much working in the industry, it kind of gave me, the first-hand exposure to what the challenges are that, as a woman, what I faced in the industry. And that there was quite a bit to do with that. There was the sexual harassment, the bullying, the intimidation, discrimination, threatening behaviour. And that was why, through my own personal experiences, why I actually founded Epic, because I recognised there weren't actually specialised services available to help support women in the industry. So that's where I'm at today, yeah.
And it's amazing when we think about businesses in Australia, what their origin story is. And just reflecting on your incredible experience there, having personal experiences that lead you to seeing a gap in the market and value that you can add is an incredibly genuine story from which a business can be founded. You mentioned a couple of challenges there, particularly around sexual harassment, bullying, and discrimination. Is there anything that you can share regarding, I guess, camp life, and particularly the challenges for females that may be working in those rural and remote camps in a FIFO arrangement?
Yeah, look, it's camp life and working FIFO, it's not an easy environment. I'll be straight up with the audience. It's not an easy environment. You are quite isolated. You are remote. You're away from your life. You're away from everything that you know, your family, your friends back home, your home, basically. When I first walked into a camp, and it was really quite overwhelming, to be honest. My first camp that I was in, there was just under 2,000 people in that camp, and out of that there was probably 100 females. That kind of energy as a female was really quite overwhelming, to be in, to be such a minority. So it was quite overwhelming. I had to work out strategies to put in place for me to help support me so I could cope. And that was very important because I love the opportunity of working on that project that I was on and, being a part of that and, construction. But then it's like you have the mental health side to deal with that you need to address as well to make sure that that's okay and that you're supported. So some of the things that I actually did, which I'm happy to share, that I actually did to help support myself was I was very mindful of, my own personal well-being. Construction is a very stressful industry, and then when you add in the element of being away from everything as well, it adds another layer to it as well. So I was very mindful of my own well-being, physical, mental, emotional. So some of the things that I did was just making sure that, I was maintaining, a routine. I mean, when you're doing those type of jobs, you're in a very strict routine anyway, because you're on site at a certain time. You're there until you finish. You go back to camp, you'll have dinner, and then it's like, okay, you kind of got two choices. You either go to the gym or you go to the wet mess. That's pretty much it, because there's not much else to do. Like, you're isolated, you're remote. So I chose the healthy route, which was going to the gym, maintaining my own physical and mental well-being, and also very mindful of my, nutrition as well, and making sure that I was actually eating well to support myself, to deal with the stress, because they are high stress environments. So making sure I was getting plenty of good nutrition with, fruit and veggies, and, not eating heaps of crap. I mean, it's, you've basically got an endless smorgasbord that you can help yourself to, but it's not overindulging, and, being very mindful of, what you're putting in to make sure you've got the right nutrition to cope as well. So
you got to be quite, sorry, Ange, please go on.
No, go, yeah.
I was going to say, so you need to be quite disciplined as an individual in that environment.
It's very disciplined, yes, and I'm lucky I'm a very disciplined person personally, but it is quite a disciplined, structure, because you can get out of control pretty quickly with it, and especially if there's a wet mess on site. And for those who don't know, that's essentially a pub. But, we had a pub on site. Yeah, no, there was a pub on site. There was no limits on this one site I'm referring to. So there were tendencies where it was quite loose, especially, on a Saturday night, you've got a couple thousand people sitting in camp. They did actually bring over, musicians and stuff like that, just for some entertainment on a Saturday night, so that there was something for people to do, especially if they weren't working the Sunday. But, then you're in an environment where people are cashed up, they're earning particularly good money, they're taking home thousands of dollars a week clear. While they're there, they don't really have, living expenses, because everything's provided. They've got their accommodation, they've got their food, they've got their clothes. It's their whatever expenses they've got obviously back at home to account for, but, you've got a lot of cashed up people with a lot of time on their hand when they're not working, and that can lead to some pretty challenging moments.
And so for those individuals who may not be as disciplined, how do you see the role of employers changing in facilitating a safe workplace and a safe environment, particularly given, camp life? And particularly if you can, and lean into a psychologically or a mentally safe workplace. As we know, the recent legislative changes from Safe Work Australia is that workplaces need to not only be physically safe, but they need to be mentally safe. And this is something that employers and employees are currently grappling with. How do you see the role of employers changing in facilitating that psychologically safe workplace?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And especially with the the psychosocial hazards, like that's a big one. And I know, just from the people who I'm connected with, and, the events and the conferences that I go to and talk to people, this is a big one that people are grappling with, especially in the construction industry, because essentially with construction, once you've got that contract signed, you're on the clock, and, you've got your time limits set, you've got, LDs in place, which is liquidated damages, that if the project isn't finished by a certain date, there's, financial penalties that are incurred. So the way that construction projects are structured from the very beginning are quite challenging for employers as well, because they're not very friendly with being able to implement, some strategies that may support them from a contractual and commercial perspective as well. So, from my own perspective, things that I believe would help is actually like focusing more on culture. And, a lot of companies do leadership training and stuff like that, which is only targeted at, management or executives or things like that. But culture is everyone's responsibility. And I personally believe it's key for everyone, for a culture to change. It is important for everyone to get on that journey from the employer all the way down. I understand from the workplace health and safety laws, like it's the employer has the responsibility to minimise the psychosocial hazards. But to minimise the psychosocial hazards, once you understand what they are, that's actually everyone's responsibility. So things like the bullying, the harassment, the discrimination, that actually is through education and awareness to everyone from the top down. So, for me, that would be like, providing resources and specialised support so that if people are experiencing issues, employers actually have those services in place for their employees, as something that they can actually do to help support their employees as well. And then that shows that they've got a commitment to the well-being of their staff. Being able to manage workload and expectations. One of the psychosocial hazards is, lack of role clarity, remote work, isolation, but there's a lot of, particularly in the industry at the moment, there's such a skill shortage and, people are burning out quite quickly because, they're not just doing one job, they're essentially doing a couple of jobs, and it does make it quite difficult for people. So having the unrealistic workloads and the constant pressure to just constantly meet deadlines and an always on, that's actually helping contribute to burnout. Whereas if employers can actually set some reasonable expectations and look at ways of what they can do to have that work-life balance for their employees as well. Appreciate it's more difficult with FIFO work, but there has to be a way. And these are the things that I'm seriously pondering at the moment, what to do. Training and education, like I said, with the culture, that's what will actually help affect positive change within the industry. And as I said, it needs to be offered at all levels, from the executives to middle management, right to the employees in the field as well. Because what that does is that actually helps raise awareness of the issues at all levels. It actually helps promote conversations about it, because essentially people don't know what they don't know. Whereas if it's actually they've got some education and awareness about it, then they can actually learn something that they may not be aware of. But then it also helps equip people with skills, to help identify psychosocial hazards. So if they can see someone being bullied or someone being threatened or someone being harassed or someone, stressed out because they're burnt out or whatever, they can actually have the courage to speak up about it then. Being able to prevent the discrimination and bullying, like making sure they've got workplaces that are free from that, that they've got their policies and procedures and everything in place to be able to address it when it does happen, that it's not something that's just swept under the carpet and, have this mindset that, that's construction, that's the way it's always been, because it's actually not acceptable behaviour, and it is actually identified as one of the hazards. So, and then leadership is so key for this. Like, leaders need to lead by example. They need to, we're all human at the end of the day and we all have human experiences. They need to be able to share what experiences they've had, which means they need to be vulnerable. They need to be approachable. They need to be open, but they also have to set that tone from the top down that helps encourage, others to prioritise their well-being as well. So, and I just think, if it's a collaborative, collective approach, with the resources, managing everything, and, employers will be able to create a workplace to help people so they can thrive and help reduce, the psychosocial hazards that they've got that legal obligation to do.
It's interesting, and you mentioned around promoting conversations, and you and I are having this conversation here in Australia, and if we cast our minds forward into September, on the 14th we have Are You OK Day, which is specifically around getting people comfortable in having conversations, and how that can help support our colleagues, our friends and our family. And among many things that we learn on Are You OK Day, there are three core elements. It's how to ask someone, are you okay? How to respond if you are asked if you are okay, genuinely, and also making time for those conversations. Because if I reflect on Australian culture, regularly we will say, hey, how you going? But we almost say that in jest. We don't give that follow-up phrase the time that it deserves in diving into how somebody is actually going. And I think it's great that industry thought leaders like yourself are promoting people to get comfortable in conversations, and to your point around leadership, also being vulnerable to the point that they are leading by example and encouraging others to engage in their own well-being, holistic well-being, including the physical and the mental aspects. So thank you for sharing that, Ange. When you reflect upon your journey through construction, what do you like most about construction?
Great question. I absolutely love construction. Like, you know, as hard as it is and as much as it stressed me out over the years, I do absolutely love it. I mean, for me to actually see something, and this happened on my first project on the Peppers Resort, and I was watching the form workers. And I remember watching the form workers, and they'd get their plans and they'd look at their plans and, you know, and then, you know, a week later or whatever it might be, whatever the time frame was, but then suddenly here's something gone from a piece of paper to an actual thing that you can see. And I just would stand there and go, wow, this is just amazing. Like, to see something go from concept to actual, it just, even to this day, you know, over 20 years on, it still just blows my mind, because I find it just so amazing. And when you see things all come together, and all the bits and pieces, and it's like, you know, for me, it's like someone's dream actually becoming a reality, and how many people have been involved in that, you know, like the engineers and the designers and everything. And, you know, they've drafted all this stuff, and then it's gone through all these phases of feasibility, you know, reports and design and approval phases. And then it actually gets to the construction phase, and that's when it all actually comes to life. And when you see it all come to life, and I just, you know, every day, and it just amazes me, you know, when you just, some of the things that I've actually seen that, you know, I've been involved in, and, you know, like when I drive past them and I see them and I go, it's kind of a bit of a proud moment, because I actually go, wow, I actually had the opportunity to work on that. Like, how awesome is that? You know, and it's things like, for people who work on, you know, roads and bridges and tunnels and airports and buildings and, you know, all the stuff that goes on, and even the stuff that I've done, which are, you know, probably a little bit more remote and harder to see, but, you know, this is all the stuff that drives the country, and it's just to be able to see it actually there and go, hey, I actually was a part of that. Like, for me, it's actually a really proud thing to say that I'd been a part of that. And I just love it. Like, I just think seeing, you know, how it's done and the people that are in it and how passionate they are, and, you know, getting things done, and how innovative they are as construction's actually being undertaken, because, you know, recognise when things are on a bit of paper, you know, it's a bit of paper, it's a concept, but when you actually start building it, there's things that you can't account for. You know, and then how innovative people get with actually managing the challenges that are on site so they can actually still achieve the outcome. You know, it's just amazing. It's really inspiring. So I love it.
That is such a genuine reflection, and I love it too. And I think about, if I wasn't in my role, where would I like to be? And construction would probably be it. I just love, as you said, appreciating it, driving past and saying that is phenomenal to see it gone from conceptualization to development. Now, Andrew, when we think about the title of our podcast being The Blueprint for Success to Empower Women in Construction, if you were to sum your blueprint up into a couple of points for women, either in construction or thinking about entering construction, what would your blueprint be?
Okay, my blueprint is trust yourself. Trust that you are worthy to be there. You know, you actually have the skills, the knowledge, the ability, and you do deserve to be there. Connection and support are really key. And I mean, that's just a human element as well, but especially for females, because you are the minority, you know, and making sure that you have got connection and support around you. You know, I have found myself that just by me having meaningful connections with others, that actually helped provide me with a silent support network that I actually wasn't even aware of. So, you know, that's one thing I am very mindful of, and that's one thing I would strongly recommend to people who are in the industry or looking at entering the industry. Make sure you've got the right, you know, you've got connections with good people and you've got the right support around you as well. So for me, support is the key in ensuring that anyone can survive in the craziness of the construction industry, because it is crazy, it is intense, it's full on, but it's, you know, it's not for the faint-hearted. But it has to be the right kind of support, as I mentioned, by the right people, those that actually genuinely care about you as a person, and that they're not just interested in pushing you to breaking point just because they're focused on getting a job done. So that is fundamental, and that's something I would recommend for people.
Thanks, Ange. And for our listeners that would look to connect with you directly, how can they find out about Epic, and how can they find out about you?
Yes, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can certainly look me up on LinkedIn, Angela Hucker, and also through my website. So my website is www.epicservices, as one word, .group, and also via email. So help@epicservices.group, and more than happy to connect with anyone, you know, provide support, share knowledge, provide insights, whatever people need. So,
thank you, Ange. And Workplace Options, as a global wellbeing provider, currently provides emotional support to many individuals across the world in rural and remote workforces, as well as those in construction. And what is unique about our services is that it is genuinely 24 hours a day. And as Ange mentioned, construction is crazy. Construction doesn't stop. And we want to make sure that our members know that we are there to help them when they need help most. And I might throw you under the bus because I think we need to catch up again, because I'd really like to dial into your experience in renewables. And I'm very conscious of Australia's renewable energy target for 2030, which isn't so far away, and the net zero target of 2050. So if I may request your permission to reconnect, and for our listeners to bookmark this podcast to come back to, I think there's a further conversation that we can have around renewables.
Sounds great. I appreciate the offer. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Ange, for joining us, and for our listeners for joining us here as well. Bye now.
Thanks, James.